Yesterday saw the start of leg 2 of the Ocean Race Europe, and first up it was the turn of the Imoca 60s, a very conservative start with 11th hour racing to windward and linked out to leeward. There was plenty of power available, and off from the line both of those teams got going, but it was linked out that got the edge on the speed and punched out to lead the fleet off to the first turning mark. In the VO65s, it was a lot more aggressive, with all of the teams very close to the line and waiting for that last possible moment to unfurl the masthead code 0 and get the acceleration to power onto the race course. Up at the windward end, it was the Austrian Ocean Race Project and Childhood One, and that seemed to be the best position. Certainly for the Austrians, they managed to sail over the top of the competition and power off into first place.
We were first at the turning mark in Cascais. But after that, the other boats put their nice A4 up, and they were just blasting away from us. So they are currently 15 to 16 miles ahead of us, and we do what we can, and there are some possibilities coming up. So we'll try to get as many options as we can.
So that was how leg 2 began. And here on the Daily Fix, we've already got so much to talk about. The last 24 hours have been action-packed, and we are in race control. If you've been following previous editions of the Ocean Race, you'll know that this place is normally a hub of activity. However, the race management team are on the road, so in the meanwhile, we've got it all to ourselves. So let's go and have a look at all the action that's been happening out in the water. And of course, let's start with 11th hour racing. So it's been a bit of a tricky start for the Americans. If you were following us yesterday, you'll know that a few miles out from the start line, the Imoca 60 struck the anchor line of a spectator boat and had, well, what can only really be described as not the best start to the offshore leg.
Shortly after the start, when we were transiting to the first mark, it's our understanding that we came into contact with the anchor line of a moored motorboat. We've been able to confirm through race management that everybody on that motorboat is okay, and we sent a group of our support team to accompany them into the marina, which they were able to do unassisted and under their own power. And I can confirm from being on board that everyone on our crew is also okay, and we take full responsibility certainly for what happened on the water today. Here we are back in the marina, assessing exactly what's happened to our boat. We've definitely sustained some damage to our port foil. We're working with the shore team and the design team to see what that means for the future of our participation.
While 11th hour racing stayed on the shore and assessed what their next move would be, the Imoca 60s and the 65s pushed on down south with some pretty impressive speeds. We knew that the conditions were out there waiting for them, and we were going to see boat speeds of over 20 knots, but also a bit of a crunch moment, when to jibe back and sail into St. Vincent Cape. Sailing Poland were the first to go, but then they decided to come back out, and as the fleet jostled and compressed, it was Merpuri Foundation racing team that found themselves out in front and enjoying the race.
Perfect condition here. 20-25 knots, sun, with the guy.
One little thing in that clip that you might have missed, just at the end, was how hard the crew were working on the pedestals. And it's important to remember that all those pedestals can be linked together, so you can have 6 people on the handles all powering one single winch. Now, we talk an awful lot in the Ocean Race about how hard the sailors are pushing and how hard they're working, and I think it's worth just taking a minute to explain why. Have a little look at this footage here of Sailing Poland and what the waves can do to the sails. As the boat's sailing down here and getting a little bit of a surf, the sail starts to collapse, and that's because the boat's accelerated as it's gone down the wave. With that, the wind feels like it's coming more from the bow, so you need to pull the sails in. If you're slow at doing that, the sail's going to flap. Now that's okay, you'll get the sail back after 20-30 seconds or so, it's not really a problem, but you missed an opportunity to go that little bit faster. So what we saw a lot of these boats do on that windy push south was get all hands to the winching handles. It would have been easy to say, look, we've got a massive night coming through the Strait of Gibraltar, but instead what they said was, no, let's use the energy now. All hands on the winches, you can see the middle pedestals being crewed on board Akzo Nobel Ocean Racing. And what that means is every time that the bow gets lifted up by the wave in front and the boat slows, the trimmer will ease the sail to keep it perfectly set. Then the wave behind starts to build, and as the stern gets lifted up and the boat starts to surf forwards, that's when the acceleration is going to come. The wind angle is going to change, and then you need to do a big wind on the winch to trim that sail properly. It's pretty easy to see from this footage just how many waves there are and how quickly they're rolling onto and past the boat. For 6, 7, 8, maybe 10 hours, we saw the teams adjusting these sails and grinding hard on every wave. That's what you need to do in this fleet if you want to win. So that's the 65s, but what about the Imoca 60s? Well, the same thing applies, but it's almost a little bit harder with the Imocas. They're a little bit shorter, and so they can get stuck between the waves. What that means is you're basically just going to run into a wall of water in front of you. And the Imoca 60s certainly seem to be sailing very differently to the 65s in the same conditions. Have a little look here at this clip of Bureau sailing downwind, and just look at how much the bow is up one moment. Then as they slot in between the waves, between the two peaks, then you start getting the bow digging in again and the boat really throwing the water around. Anytime these boats are making excess spray, that means it's slowing down. So a lot of hard work on the Imoca 60s to try and stop that from happening. It's not easy to do that. There's a couple of options, like what we saw from Linked Out at the start. This is their stack of really heavy spare sails, put at the back of the boat to try and keep the stern down and therefore the bow up. But even with that, it still doesn't stop things like this happening. And in the conditions that we saw yesterday, with the waves quite close together and causing a real problem for the Imoca 60s, it didn't give those boats a chance to really fire themselves at top speed. They had to hold back. And while everybody may have been watching the leaders in the Imoca 60s and the 65 class blasting downwind in the conditions, meanwhile, at Cascais, there's some good news for fans of 11th Hour Racing as they sent us this update.
We've restarted Leg 2. We suspended racing earlier after catching the anchor line of a moored boat between the starting line and the first mark. We got back to the dock and we did a full technical assessment of the damage that was sustained to our foil. We deemed the best thing to do was to take it out of the boat and send it to the manufacturer for some non-destructive testing, at which point we'll know more about the future of that particular foil. We're back on the water, on our way to Alicante, with everybody safe and sound. And, the objective is to keep it as close as possible here, to push the boat within reason and see if we can get a couple points and to keep this show on the road and not throw in the towel and to keep soldiering on and give it the best we can with what we got.
So 11th Hour Racing back in the race and chasing down the fleet of Imoca 60s, but of course without one of their foils, and a little bit of a question as to what that would mean for their performance. So to get an idea as to how they're going to sail the boat differently and also how they're feeling about giving such a big head start to the other boats, we asked Mark Tao, CEO of 11th Hour Racing Team.
I really think any challenging situation is an opportunity to grow and to demonstrate, who we really are as a team. And all of us at 11th Hour Racing Team really feel a strong sense of resilience. We've been really committed to this race, and I think there was really no question that we were going to continue on. And as far as the personalities on board, I know that all 5 sailors are just as motivated to keep pushing to try to win the leg as they were at the start. And I think anything's possible, so it's going to be a really interesting finish to the leg. Since restarting the race, we obviously don't have a foil on the port side of the boat. That's a setback from a performance standpoint. We just won't be as optimized on one side as we will on the other. But interestingly, we have spent some time in this situation with just one foil. Last year, based on our testing schedule, we did a transatlantic with only one foil. So we have some pretty accurate data on how the boat performs with and without a foil. And looking forward to the rest of the leg, as they get into Gibraltar and then into the Med, there's going to be quite a bit of upwind sailing. The lack of the foil is going to be a significant hit. Effectively, for the dinghy sailors out there, it'll be like trying to sail upwind in your laser with your centerboard halfway up. So we just won't be able to resist the leeway of the boat slipping sideways. But there do seem to be some big opportunities ahead with some light wind zones and a number of transitions, as we've seen sailing around in the Med in the past. And what a cool story it would be if we can have gone through this situation, come back stronger, and put a few points on the board.
Meanwhile, the rest of the boats had reached Cabo St. Vincent and faced a little bit of a question. We knew that the first few hours were going to be downwind, blasting, and just a little bit of a speed ride. However, now the tactical considerations kicked in. A little bit more stressful for Murpuri Foundation Racing Team in the lead, and found themselves having to make those tactical decisions before anybody else.
What is the routing saying from north to south of the VSF?
It depends what you look at, and it's a bit of a mess. But the north is very risky because that light wind zone, it gets out of it by miracle at some point, and the south is easier because like the light wind zone is like a V. So you got like little cells of pressure and light winds up there. But then if you cross the V at the bottom, it's a lot shorter, and once you're out of it, you're sailing, you know? So it's a bit hard to go into a very tricky...
It's good that we are quite close to them, so it's easy to see if they're following or not.
Yeah. If any one of those chooses to go north, I think it's going to be hard, you know, and it splits, it's going to be... I reckon it's going to be messy to follow.
Okay.
So Murpuri Foundation Racing Team leading the fleet and waiting to see what move was going to be the best. And after rounding Cabo St. Vincent, everybody dialed south to try and get to the better position on the breeze. And while waiting for that light wind transition to kick in, it just didn't kick that hard. The breeze stayed pretty forgiving, and the boat speeds were above 8, 9, maybe even 10 knots for the majority of the fleet. Still out in the lead, it was Murpuri Foundation Racing Team, and in the Imoca 60s, it was linked out. But Axonabel Ocean Racing were getting ready to strike.
The transition last night wasn't quite so bad as we expected. We stood away a little bit from the fleet to the north, and we're not too sure how it's going to pay out at the moment. Yeah, no, big wind, and yeah, we're just going to get through this next kind of tricky phase of tacking through Tarifa. Lots of tacking back and forth to get through the narrow passage, and then into the Med. So looking forward to drying off once we get in there.
One big obstacle down, or at least it didn't really emerge, but the very real obstacle of going through the Strait of Gibraltar with winds against you. And the forecast was showing that potentially the boats could see 35 plus knots. Everybody had been preparing for this, not just since the start line, but before, both physically and mentally. And while Linked Out were leading, they were in good spirits, but they knew what was to come.
How is going to be the straight, Thomas?
Sorry? Sorry, Jacques.
Le détroit, comment ça va être? Ça va être windy.
Ça va être windy, ouais. Non, ça va être venté le détroit.
38 knots of wind, and we are a bit over the line. But it doesn't matter because we are going faster. Doing many tacks between Spain and the African coast. Attack every 10 or 15 minutes. So everybody is out there on the deck, and we want to go as fast as possible. It is a bit tiring. Nobody goes to have a nap or anything because we have to be very efficient.
No rest for Linked Out, and indeed no rest for any of the teams out in the water at the moment. This was how they lined up to sail through the Strait of Gibraltar, with Linked Out leading in the Imoca 60s and sailing Poland in the VO 65s. Behind them, Bureau had to bear away for a while. We're not too sure what the cause was, but the good news is they're back underway and sailing in the right direction. Meanwhile, Axonabel Ocean Racing was the first boat to break and go to the north, putting pressure on the boats in the south as Linked Out continued to enjoy the conditions.
Petit séjour au Maroc. Ah, il y a du vent là. Il y a 30 nœuds, on est au près. Et l'air est chaud.
Plenty of breeze and plenty of speeds for everybody, but not great news for 11th Hour Racing. They wanted the fleet to close down. However, they were making progress towards Viva Mexico and Buer Valley, and ahead of them, Corum was to the north with Austrian Ocean Race Project, Team Germany and Amber Sail 2 just behind the leaders. Then we have the front pack, and this is where it was a little bit difficult to pick out a top boat. Childhood One and Murpuri Foundation Racing Team weren't vying for the lead just yet. Aktion Nobel Ocean Racing were to the north with Linked Out and Sailing Poland, all potentially leaders. So no real clear leader at the moment, but if you've been following the race, you'll be as surprised as we all are that the Imoca 60s are performing well upwind in a blow, and the VO 65s have been able to hold on to them downwind. So still some racing to go. We know that the breeze is going to get light, and the next few days are going to be very interesting indeed. We're going to be back tomorrow with a more detailed look at the weather, something that's going to play a crucial role in the final few miles. But today we're going to leave you with all the stuff that we just simply didn't have room for today. Enjoy.
Come on.